So good afternoon, and to my students and other attendees in the room, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am going to first tell you a little bit about RIGS, which is a research organization on campus, and welcome you to the event. And then we'll introduce the speakers here today. So welcome to today's event, hosted by the Research on Interdisciplinary Global Studies here at Montclair State University. RIGS, for short, we call it RIGS, is a vibrant hub for innovative research and cross-disciplinary collaboration dedicated to addressing some of the most pressing global challenges of our time. Our work spans a range of critical themes, each designed to foster deeper understanding and real-life solutions. The program focuses on several key areas. First, human rights and social justice, where we explore issues related to equity, inclusion, and the fight against systemic oppression. Sustainable development, which examines the balance between economic growth, environmental preservation, and social equity. This includes research on climate change, resource management, and the transition towards greener economies. Migration and global displacement, addressing the complexities surrounding refugee crises, forced migration, and the socio-political factors driving displacement across regions. Digital and technological transformation, where we critically assess the impact of AI, digital tools, and technology on governance, diplomacy, and social movements. And then finally, peace building and conflict resolution, engaging with efforts to mediate conflict, foster reconciliation, and promote peaceful coexistence in post-conflict societies. Through these themes, we strive to push the boundaries of traditional academic discourse, promoting collaboration between scholars, practitioners, activists. We believe, that by connecting disciplines and viewpoints, we can better address the challenges that we face globally and provide meaningful, actionable insights. Thank you all for joining us. Today, our talk is entitled AI Use and Meaning Making. We are joined by colleagues who are conducting research and implementing AI solutions in the classroom. And joining us virtually are two experts, Lee Rainie, and each of them will introduce themselves, as well as Shyam. In the physical space on campus, we also have colleagues who will join the discussion today. And I'm so pleased that our colleague from Bloomfield College, Fiona Harris-Ramsby, is joining us here today. And she'll be talking more about her work on writing and how AI can help, but also sometimes hinder writing. And of course, the focus today for us is on AI as a disruptive force and what it means for meaning making for all of us as human beings. So we'll have a rich and collaborative discussion. And I'm going to ask our two speakers on the screen to introduce themselves because they can do better justice to that than I can. So we'll start with Lee, and then we'll go to Sam, and we'll go to Fiona and my colleague David, who is here, who will also play a role as the moderator today. So Lee, over to you.
I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a marvelous and important topic to be discussing. Couldn't be more honored and pleased to be with you. I run a research center at Elon University in North Carolina, not related in any way, shape, or form to Elon Musk. It is a 140-year-old university that was formed as a teacher's college at first in the late 19th century, and now is a thriving private liberal arts school in North Carolina. The center that I run is set up to study the future of digital life as well as the present practices in digital life.
Thank you. Sam.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Ditto on how honored I feel and how important I think this topic and this discussion is at this time, as Lee said. My name is Shyam Sharma. I am a professor and graduate program director in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric here at Stony Brook University, which is part of the State University of New York system. I am mostly an AI user, teacher, practitioner, but I have been involved in a few publications, research, grants, and the leadership work around AI. Very actively involved in the university at the state level and some international work. So I'm really delighted to be able to join this conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Fiona, do you want to come and just introduce yourself?
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Fiona Harris-Ramsby. My students know me as Dr. Freddie. I had weird British parents who named me Freddie. So you're welcome to call me that. I want to welcome my students from Bloomfield College who are in the virtual space taking notes. Hi, Bianca and Brianna and the rest of you. I run the first year writing program at Bloomfield College. And this semester, in our Writing 109 and 108 research course, we adopted Sam's methods of integrating AI into the writing classroom. So I'm very grateful to Sam for all that work, and I'm happy to be here.
Hello, David Axelrod. I've taught in the economics department, sort of micro, macro, and a course I developed called Economics of Time, Mind, and Spirit. So there's a lot of overlap there. And I've been working with Ethne and Arnaud on papers and the themes this year. So thank you very much.
Okay, so I think the way that we are going to do this, Lee, is you will start with your presentation. I think we'll go to full screen, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to, oh, that's perfectly fine. And then we'll go to Sam, and at about 2:50 or just shortly before 3, we'll switch to an interactive discussion. So over to you.
Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. It's never happened to me before. Thanks again for having me here. I'm going to talk about 3 pieces of research that we released in this calendar year that sort of give you some context for the conversation about the AI mind and meaning making, which is a wonderful sort of summative kind of thought and experience to be thinking about as we move into this new era. The first is a piece of research that we did where we did a representative sample. We did a scientific survey of American adults. We gathered a representative group of users of language models like ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, and Gemini. And this slide sort of pulls together all the ways in which we think there are major stories going on in the user space. Large language models are the things that are undergirding those particular applications like ChatGPT. So for starters, the survey was conducted in February. More than half of Americans now use language models. Interestingly enough, there was a survey that came out of Canada this morning that said 2/3 of Canadian adults are at least occasional users of language models. One of the striking things that we see in the user data compared with the rise of the internet, with social media, with mobile connectivity, which were things that I used to study when I worked at the Pew Research Center, we're already at a major moment of breakout of users and adoption of these technologies. We've well past the era of early adopters, and we're going into literally the majority of the population. So the older adoption stories would have said that men are more likely to use a new technology than women. Now women and men are equal in that. There in the United States, Hispanic language model users are more prevalent, and Black language model users are more prevalent than white users. So some dimensions of older digital divides aren't showing up in these new technologies. Age is still a major story here. Younger people are more likely to be LLM users than older folks. But again, sort of a quarter of people age 65 and older are already users of this technology, which is an amazing story, particularly if you consider that the sort of big bang moment for language models was November of 2022. So just a year and a half ago, and we're already seeing sort of astounding levels of adoption. And it shows up in people's household incomes. It used to be the case that if you were poorer, you were less likely to use new digital technologies. Now it's the case that people living in households earning less than $50,000 are statistically as likely to be LLM users as people living in households with earning over $100,000. Employment matters still, but I would point your eyes to the 41% of those who are not working are also language model users. And I think a lot of the narrative around language models has been the business uses and the impact on jobs and things like that. Really important part of the story. But the fact of the matter is, even among workers, the personal uses, the enrichment uses, the private uses of language models are more prevalent than the business uses. Education still matters, and being a parent of a minor child has always been a strong predictor of technology adoption, and that's the case here. The material on the right side of this slide just shows you how much they have become embraced in people's lives. So two-thirds of these language model users have had spoken conversations with those models. And of course, agentic AI is now a very prominent thing. 2025 has been billed as the years of agent artificial intelligence becoming a mainstream activity in the culture. And we see that people are already using these technologies to be socially engaged with them. They have conversations with them. They attribute sort of very common human characteristics to these technologies. Half say that the technologies are smarter than they are. They're pretty happy with the performance of the technologies. They feel like they make them more productive. And I would call your attention to 42% say their use has improved their creativity. So one of the concerns about the rise of language models is, of course, it was going to take over human creativity or just steal human creativity and discourage people from wanting to be creators or thinking about it. So it's interesting to see in these early days that people are saying, no, actually, it's helping my creativity. Then I outlined some of the human-like traits that people attribute to language models. They attribute thought and reason to them, a sense of humor, making moral judgments. About a quarter say their models they use express hope. About a fifth of them say they act sarcastically, and about a tenth say they act expressing sadness. Of course, you can't have conversations about the advent of AI without thinking about the darker impacts, and they're showing up among users too, even as these users are enthusiastic in general about the technologies. So half feel that they're being lazy at times when they use LLMs. Third say they're cheating. A third say they're confused. A third feel that they feel like they are becoming too dependent on LLMs to answer questions that they pose to them. About a quarter have said that they've made a bad decision or a significant mistake relying on the information, and a fifth say that they have been manipulated by the models. So the big reality of this moment in history is that these technologies are getting better and better at lots of things, and lots of things that human used to be exclusively good at. If you think about the biological world, it was our intelligence, it was our creativity, it was our social capacities that literally dominated the planet. I mean, there's a big argument about whether this era should be called the Anthropocene because of the impacts humans have had. Well, now there are intelligences that are rising that are smarter than us, at least in some capacities. And the boundary between human intelligence and AI intelligence in some cases is getting a lot narrower, or even getting a lot more fluid and shifting. So core things are at issue, like who we are, what we do, how we connect, and how we think. Again, sort of as these technologies propagate through the general population, those questions become even more urgent around us. Which gets me to the second piece of research that we released just a few weeks ago about the impact of AI systems on the essence of being human. And one of the things that I'm sure that many of you have heard about is, as AI was coming to prominence, starting maybe a decade, 12, 13, 14 years ago, one of the standard answers about how to cope with that was, we'll just get better at the things that humans are uniquely good at. We're uniquely good at complex problem solving and social intelligence and empathy and being creative and fluid in difficult situations. So we asked a bunch of experts. This is not a scientific sample of all expertise on AI, but it's a very diverse sample of people who are technology builders, technology analysts, technology commentators, and things like that. And we asked about 12 dimensions of human capacity and what AI might do to them over the next decade. And we asked, would things turn out more negatively than positively as AI grows up, or vice versa? And 9 of the 12 characteristics we outlined, they said that things would turn out more negatively than positively. Just running quickly down that list, they talked about the impact would be more negative than positive on basically pattern recognition, complex problem solving, social emotional intelligence, confidence in our own native abilities. I mean, one of the great things about humans is their capacity to want to make progress, have ambition, to want to solve problems, to want to improve their lives. And now these experts are worried that we're going to have a dampening effect, that AI might depress that very human instinct. Mental well-being, of course, might be an issue. Empathy is one of the main things that forever people were saying humans were good at. Well, now these experts are a little bit worried about the capacity of AI to depress and make people concerned about their capacity for empathy, and down the rest of the list. But on the more positively than negatively side, they were more upbeat about humans' curiosity, humans' decision-making skills, and humans' creativity. So they were thinking AI would help those 3 things more than hurt. And I'm still pondering what this all means as you look at the sorting of these 12 categories. And it strikes me that the things that are rated more negatively than positively about the impact of AI feel like emotional, social, and sort of internal to human beings in their capacities. They're things that we think about, things that we internalize and act on because of that internalization. And the things that they have hope for, these experts have hope for, are sort of instrumental. These are things that AI can help humans make decisions around. These are things that AI can provide actionable information to people. And they're things that sort of force humans to think outside themselves and think about others. So I'm still pondering this. I'll be interested in how other panels might think about the sorting that's going on here. But there's clearly a lot of commotion about what the impact of AI might be. The final quick thing I'll run through, just because we're on campus here and we've done some research related to campus life. We did a survey with the American Association of Colleges and Universities, interviewing and doing a survey of college presidents and provosts and high-level academic deans. And we marched them through a variety of things. And the 3 that I thought were most useful and interesting for the conversation about meaning making were, we asked about the future. In the next 5 years, how much do you think generative AI will affect the typical teaching model at your institution? The vast majority said there will be an effect. About half said that there will be a significant effect on teaching models. So the way that your predecessors learned might not be the way that you in the future and your offspring will learn when you're in higher education. And then my favorite battery of questions was, again, sort of in this positive, negative context about what things will do. We asked these college presidents and provosts, what do you think the impact of AI, generative AI tools may have on the future when it comes to these aspects of student lives? So they thought in the future, there'll be change for the better in enhanced and customized learning for students, improved research skills that will be taught with using these tools, increased creativity by students as they embrace these tools and use them well in their lives, and increased ability to write clearly and persuasively. So I'll be really interested to hear how Freddie will talk about this in the context of her, on the ground, immediate experience today. So remember, these are 4 things that are positive. Now look at these things. They also think that the rise of and spread of AI tools around campus in the coming life is going to affect students by encouraging to develop an over-reliance on AI tools. That they had increased concerns about academic integrity. There are lots of concerns now about cheating. The majority of these presidents and provosts said it was getting worse on their campuses, so that's top of mind for them. They also worry about student attention spans, and they also worry that these tools will not be generally available for everyone, that they might widen digital inequities. So that's the end of my rundown of some of the major work that we've been doing, and I really can't wait to hear the rest of the panelists and see how they're responding to these important questions. Thanks.
So Sam, over to you.
Oh, wow. That was like looking at someone building a whole, the foundation for the village, so I can go and build a few homes. You laid the foundation so well, Lee. And I'm thinking I may also add a little bit of a dimension to the village, a little forest, but I'll basically build on what you said. Let me start sharing the screen here. The screen. I think what I'm going to do is take that and alrighty. I'm going to focus on the that side of the knowledge ecology, knowledge economy, which affects not only the nature of knowledge in the landscape of AI generated knowledge and AI in engaged knowledge with human agency and oftentimes without, and then to take it into the context of learning. So I'll start with a little bit of the mythology that is, spreading around, that AI knows everything, or at least it gives the impression because that's how it's designed. But really, AI tools are really drunk uncles that are designed to pretend that they know everything. That doesn't mean anything. Like, they know only what they know. I'll get into that. And then the drunk uncle design has serious implications when machines are persuading human beings. It is not just they're informing, they're persuading. That is the most dangerous part. And then that is built on many centuries of what I call the excesses of persuasion, when persuasion becomes like the axe the farmer uses all the time, regardless of the function of the work he's doing. We need to be cautious about that. You can look at that if you look at different rhetorical traditions and cultures from around the world, especially beyond the Western Hemisphere. And we need a globally inclusive framework for that reason, so that we can use feminist rhetorical traditions, native and indigenous rhetorical traditions, and non-Western rhetorical traditions that would actually make us more rich and cautious about the excesses of persuasive model. And finally, and I think Lee's presentation is about how AI has been persuading people, even when they're conscious that they're using it to cross the boundaries, they're still using it. It has become so persuasive in terms of its convenience, speed, efficiency, whatnot. And then finally, what are the implications of that when it comes to the knowledge economy in the context of reading, writing, and learning? So AI, I have written a recent chapter in which I say AI knows nothing. Here's why I say that. 1% of AI training data is from or about the entire continent of Africa, with 18% of world population, 54 countries, 20% of global landmass, the cradle of human civilization with hundreds of languages, cultures, and epistemologies, and rhetorical traditions. So it has 1%. They only have access to a few of the databases. Try JSTOR. They may not gain access to aggregate databases as quickly as we want because of the economic dynamic. They may not have the incentive to buy all of that data, nor do they have access to a lot of these others. Paywalls, books, government industry records, most other languages. If you go to ChatGPT, it says it was only trained for safety in English and Mandarin. They've no access to human knowledge as it is embodied in diverse languages, cultures and practices, communities and traditions, skills and crafts, orality and performance. So that is what language as a knowledge means. But for them, knowledge means whatever internet junk they were able to feed, plus a little bit of quality data. But the fact that it was designed to convince you that it knows everything makes it feel like it knows everything. All right. And here is the sort of broader view of what that information landscape looks like. To begin with, our information landscape looked like this before ChatGPT, before the massive advent of the modern AI. This was a global map created out of the journal publication in certain indexes dominated by the Western Europe and North America. Obviously, that map would look like this. Africa is a hair, and all of South America is shrunken, and most of Asia. Why would it look like that? Because the cartography is wrong. No, don't blame the map. Blame the map making. Why did we decide that journal articles would be able to map the world's knowledge system? That is dumb to begin with, right? And now, as if that was not bad, this is what happens when you put AI into the equation. You see what is bulging here? And it is not in our interest, because if we don't know much about the world, of course, we're going to look like the biggest, but we don't benefit from that kind of cartography. Again, if you look at the cartography of who has the AI startups, then it looks like this. It's getting shrinking in terms of diversity, in terms of its ability to understand, in terms of its ability to know the rest of the world. So that means that has implications when machines have the ability to persuade, not only capture information and paint a landscape of what knowledge ecology looks like, but also able to persuade on the basis of that flawed data, that incomplete data that pretends to be complete. One is that they pretend to know everything, and the second is that they hold the user accountable for veracity, for harms, for completeness, for comprehensibility. I call it the 3 R's of AI use. Is it real? Is it reliable? And then only, is it reliable? With the internet, it was only, is it reliable and is it relevant? But with AI, it's also, is it real? Is it made up? It may lead users to rabbit holes of ignorance and misuse. That persuasion-dominant cultures and systems are sitting ducks for this kind of abuse of technology, because if persuasion is everything, then we're not asking questions of trust, value, benefit, learning, and professional responsibility, environmental ethics. Unethical persuasion can explode without built-in accountability. Knowledge politics behind AI makes the harms on a global scale go unpunished. And that is why the excesses of persuasion can be aggravated. Let me go back up a little bit and say, in mainstream, and unpack that. In mainstream Aristotelian or the Greco-Roman Anglo-American tradition, persuasion is viewed uncritically, rather uncritically by default, as a universal form of rhetoric. Other tools in the rhetorical toolset are ignored. Within the RAA tradition, you don't really think about ethics too much. You don't think about inclusion too much. You don't think about diversity, comprehensibility, responsibility, accountability too much. I try to study up a little bit, but it's actually almost tangential sometimes when you look at the Western rhetorical tradition, the dominant tradition, and not to mention our current political tradition. And therefore, persuasive rhetoric and practice are spreading to the rest of the world, and that is also concerning. When AI uses proxy agent to persuade people, then it aggravates the problems. Here's how. Consider responsibility, okay? When there was a human rhetor, the message was coming from the human being with the responsibility towards the audience, so the persuasion and engagement happened where the rhetor was responsible. Now, if you add a proxy, you may hide behind the proxy and say, well, ChatGPT told me so. You have seen cases of legal cases, like the, I think it was the Michael Cohen case. He generated a bunch of legal cases and later on ducked out of his responsibility, didn't lose his license because it was ChatGPT generated. This dynamics could be happening every day, right? because the rhetor is not responsible because proxy has been inserted. Now, if you put the audience as the prompter, not the rhetor, then what happens with the proxy is that it gets ahead of the message, the cart gets in front of the horse, and then the lines are even further blurred. If you put the proxy first without human agency at all, it generates this message in a vacuum, ethical vacuum, rhetorical vacuum. And that's taking the human agency and accountability out of the equation. That's dangerous. And therefore, guardrails are needed against the excesses of persuasion, where Aristotle does say that persuasion involves character, it should bring about happiness, but that is not necessarily the case in the political landscape, in the AI landscape. The design itself needs to go back to the Quintilian, the Catholic priest, who said persuasion should only happen when a good man speaks well, not a dishonest man speaks well. Or the African rhetoric, where you should listen to the farmer who is honest, and may not be so effective rhetorically, rather than the courtier who is effective rhetorically but not so honest. And so the themes here are that persuasion should be good for the audience and not just for the rhetor. Content should be complete, accurate, and beneficial to the audience, and not simply, I don't know, I just got it from a drunk uncle. Authority and ethos should come out of a character of the rhetor and should be trustworthy, and not like, okay, I'm depending on power and money and force. And therefore, we need to really rethink the whole framework of persuasion. That means we may want to grapple with the consequences by really thinking, how do I seek to diversify knowledge base so it knows what it's talking about, that it doesn't harm or misrepresent people, that it expands the databases and the rhetoric and the causes of use of rhetoric. How does it transcend geopolitical power hegemony? How does it integrate inclusive values and goals towards the ethical AI systems for people, for the planet, for communities? And I think it can be done if we use simple techniques in both our design and our use, because we don't have access to the design. We may have access to the deployment and the access to use, not only to support ourselves, but also to impact others, such as feminist rhetorical principles, where they find the persuasive patriarchal tradition to be a little excessive, and they recommend 3 feminist principles of eminent value, that all of us have inherent value, we must be respected. That means we're equal with each other, and that means we're able to self-determine whether we want to be persuaded by each other without being forced to persuade. That means we would not have the machine say, here's what you need to know, here's what you need to do, but rather, here's what you need to think for yourself. Are machines able to do that? Are we using machine in that way to affect others? And are we using machine to affect ourselves in that manner? Excuse me. The other method would be to use justice-based rhetoric that are available in South Asian Nyaya Sutra tradition or indigenous traditions around the world, or the African rhetorical techniques that I mentioned, or the old Hebrew and Judaic techniques of where there's no real persuasion. You have to have faith in each other. You have to have faith in the principles that guide your life, in God or some other foundation. Many languages do not even have words for persuasion or convincing. In my home language, I once posted Nepali. I once posted a Facebook post saying, how does the word persuade or convince translate in our language? 50 scholars tried and failed. There's none. And therefore, holding human agents to be responsible towards the proxy use is maybe the pathway for us in the context of education. I'm sorry, I had this allergy and I didn't have a water in front of me. But in the context of education, I use with my students the simple technique that I call the 3 seesaws of AI use. Seesaw 1, you need to have adequate knowledge to be able to judge the response of AI or the action of AI. You would be able to say whether or not the data set seems adequate if you have enough knowledge on the topic. Otherwise, in the seesaw, you are flying in the air. AI is so heavy, so dominant, you're not playing the seesaw. In terms of skills, we need to have adequate skills to be able to prompt, use, or use AI effectively. Otherwise, AI will be so powerful in terms of its capacity. Your capacity to use it is so low, you're flying in the air, not playing the seesaw of skills. The third seesaw is the seesaw of ethics. If you are not honest and accountable to other people, to yourself, to your own learning goals, then AI will be so heavy in its ability to wow you with its efficiency, with its power, with its processing and analytical ability that you'll be flying in the air again. You know, where AI will slump on the ground, you won't place the seesaw. But if you can play the seesaw by taking the human agency back and saying, I know what it is saying, I know how I'm using it, I know that I'm not wowed because I'm lazy, because I'm dishonest, because I don't care about my own learning or the impact on others, then maybe you're playing the seesaw. I don't have a better metaphor, but I think this seesaw will continue to happen in time as well as space, and therefore I think we need to take the responsibility. At the end of the day, here are some fundamentals for the students in our group, as well as for the faculty. What does it mean to use plausible patterns? Is that content? Is that expertise? Will you cite? Will you put quotation marks around whatever drunk uncle tells you? Or will you go to the house up top of the mountain using the directions of the drunk uncle, or will you ask, wait a second, am I going to the wrong house, or there's no house at all? Creativity. Can AI go beyond generating to locating, interacting, and doing dozens of other skills in ways that you can rely, right? Who is responsible? Credit. Who is getting the credit? Is it AI? If you look at the US Copyright Office, or if you look at the Middle States accreditation body that came up with the policy guideline last week, they don't consider AI content in the way we consider content or knowledge, right? So where do you anchor the credibility? In you? How do you gain trust and credibility? By saying, I use AI to generate the first draft or edit the final draft or whatever that is. What is your commitment to each other, right? How much time and effort will you put while you're enhancing learning, while you're affecting others, while you're supporting others, and what is your code of conduct? I think we need to ask the questions like the seesaw questions to create our own code of conduct. We cannot simply say, we cannot simply hide behind the power of technology, because there are serious implications to knowledge economy. Let me just focus on one aspect of knowledge economy, which is on writing, on the tool that we use to generate knowledge, the tool that we use to facilitate learning, the tool that we use to run our society and professional institutions and constitutions, the tool that we use to articulate our thoughts and find our identity and voice in the world. Writing is not text generating. Writing is thinking, is interacting, is documenting, is retrieving. Writing is what runs the whole civilization. And you may call me a hammer that only sees the world in writing, nails, but think about it for yourself, whether you're an economist or engineer or doctor. Think about it when you're using writing. AI is putting all of these traditional myths about writing on steroid. Mythology 1. In the field of writing, in the disciplines, these are established scholarly terms of reference, that writing is a single, simple, and linear process. It's not. It's messy, it's recursive, it is never-ending, it is always a draft. It is a means for thinking. You don't think before you write, you think while you write. You don't finish thinking when you finish drafting, you keep going. It's a means to an end, it's not an end itself. It's not a product, it's a process. Myth of transience, that writing is enough once you learn it, so that after you finish learning to write in 10th grade or 12th, then you can tell your writing professor, economics professor, I know how to write already. And the economics professor go, no, this is a new genre. Or this is the new set of demand. This is a new context. This is a new audience. This is a new culture. The third myth is transparency, that writing is all transparent. You write it up once you have thought through it. The fourth myth is the hierarchy myth, that writing, you can outsource a lower level or a lower order writing task to AI or some other tool or somebody else. Nope. Actually, even when you're editing, some of the most consequential thinking are still happening. The content myth, that content is separate from the form of writing. You cannot separate the dance from the dancer in this case, the thinking from the writing. The style myth, good writing is mostly about brilliant writing or genius writers. Nope. It's an acquirable skill. Good writing is a lot of things, and you cannot really nail it. And finally, it's genius. Related to number 6, we're not born genius. Some of us may have a little bit of leverage because of our backgrounds, of our prior education, but that is not enough. A good writer who is a poet cannot write a grant proposal, or vice versa. Don't try. And here's how AI is putting the myths on steroid. On the linearity myth, it will, AI use will just tell you that AI will help you to skip through the tough step of generating content. Good luck. That was where everything happened. Your reading, your annotation, your outlining, your brainstorming, your intellectual positioning, your literature reviewing, your data collection, your data analysis, your data interpretation. All of that was happening in the process of generating the content. And if you believe you can just content generate in work, start from there, you're starting at step number 9, depending on what you're writing. Drunk Uncle has done up to 8 for you. Now, transients. Sorry. You don't have to learn it anymore, AI will say. AI can do the writing for you. Because the skill that you acquired until 12th grade, maybe AI will do it. You were born in 13th grade as a writer. Ain't work. Transparency. AI is better at writing it up than human beings. Same thing. It won't do all of the thinking, synthesis, organizing, clarifying, fleshing out for you. It's okay to offload lower order tasks. I'm not so sure. Even if you're editing, you might want to pay attention. The content, it knows it all. Well, I dealt with the drunk uncle before. It doesn't have access to most of the knowledge. You may need to actually use the databases if it doesn't have access to them. A style myth. AI can write in the style of Shakespeare. Yeah, maybe, because people fed Shakespeare into it adequately. But really, ask a Shakespeare expert, and you'll find out. The genius myth. It's a cop-out. Don't really believe that easily. Remember the drunk uncle component. And I think if there is any solution, it is to break down the process of your work, your ethical, professional, social responsibility, and see what aspect of the task, with which tool you can delegate, to what extent, and how you're going to take responsibility. There are tests like this. I can share them in the chat box in a moment, or tasks like this that Freddie talked about earlier. But always use the real, reliable, relevant, the 3R rubric in your head. Is it real? Or is it fake? If it is real, is it reliable? And if it's reliable, is it relevant, right? I might even add a 3rd, 4th R, because what is it taking away from me? Am I doing I would say responsible, right? Am I taking my responsibility? But all of us will have to come up with our own rubric in the context and purpose and audience and ethics of our work. At the end of the day, I remember JFK, ask not what AI can do for you, ask what you can do with AI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. That's very thought-provoking. David, over to you. Shall we sit over here? We're going to shift a little to a Q&A. You're welcome to ask questions. You can put your hand up if you need. I will actually ask my colleague, Alfredo.
Yes.
Okay, do we have any questions in the audience here? Yes.
My question was for Shyam. So you mentioned that your AA rhetoric often overshadows or undervalues ethical concerns. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how this happens in a practical context, and what we can do to or what can be done to strengthen the ethical means of consumption? I don't know if that makes sense.
Can someone closer to the mic repeat that question for us? Lee, could you hear?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
But okay. Oh, you have the mic, right?
Yeah, I do.
Somehow it was not very clear. To help us reinforce, summarize, repeat.
Oh, you were talking about GRA rhetoric. Can you talk about how this affects us in a more applicable context, and what we can do to combat it, or how do we go about it?
In what context? The word, what context again?
In a practical context.
Oh, practical context.
Yeah,
Lee, would you like to start? or maybe other colleagues too?
I think it was coming off of your slide. So
I see. So how do we maintain or ethical standards while using AI? I'm just repeating this so I can understand better the question, and let's go from there. You are a student, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And so you are in the context of learning. I think I have another, I didn't want to present too much, but I have another sort of frame in which I use 4 pillars. Pillar 1 is, what is my goal, right? Like I want to learn, so that your responsibility is not so much toward the professor, but toward yourself, that you are learning. If it is undermining learning, then you might want to stop using it or use it differently or use a different tool and so on and so forth, right? So the goal is the first pillar. The second is the knowledge. Like you need to know about the technology, about the topic, all of the things that I talked about knowledge today, so that you are a knowledgeable user. You're more likely to get the benefit or the goal, right? That's the second. The third is the ability to benefit also comes from a third dimension, or third pillar, which is skills. If you avoid using AI or learning about how to use it more effectively, more efficiently, then you may not really gain. You may be too cautious. I know there is this contradiction that you don't want to use AI too much because you're harming the environment. You don't want to use AI too much because you're also potentially harming your learning, right? But the cautious skill building seems necessary because so much of your use of AI depends on your skill level. But number 4 is responsibility or ethics. So I think you need to situate responsibility that you mentioned in the context of 4 different pillars, so that responsible means knowledgeable, responsible means skillful, and responsible means honest. Make sense? So I would say knowledgeable, skillful, goal-oriented, and honest, or start with the goal, go to the knowledge, go to the skill, and then finally be honest. And that honesty also cannot be simply accountable in vague terms. It should be like, if I'm learning, I'm honest to the person who is teaching, right? So I can say to Professor Rainie, I use AI to generate my draft. Is that okay? So the professor is able to say, no, in this case, I don't want it, right? And therefore, the idea of responsible and effective use is not just a one metric issue. It's a multi-metric issue, right? So you need to find out, what are my 3 metrics? What are my 4 metrics, 4 pillars? Then you are able to answer that question. I'm responsible when I use it knowledgeably, skillfully, and transparently. Yes, and to achieve the goals, because at the end of the day, you're in the driver's seat. We should stop telling students to not use AI or use AI, but rather asking them, why do you want to use it? How should you use it? How should you not use it? And by throwing the skill ball in their court, by throwing the knowledge ball in their court, and by throwing the responsibility or transparency ball in their court, I think our students are able to make the determination. Otherwise, we'll be simply policing them until the 14th week, and on the 15th week, they'll go ahead and do whatever the Pew Research shows us.
Yeah, I love it. Can you hear me, Sam? It's Freddie. Hi. I'd like to add to that question. From what I understand, you're asking for practical responses to how in what Sam is saying, how would that apply? I think Sam has already answered that question, but I think for me and for the students that I teach at Bloomfield, it boils down to the learner's paradox. The learner's paradox comes to us from Plato's Meno, right? Basically, how can you assess the worth of something if you don't know to begin with, right? So I keep pounding this, forcing it down my students' throats. You have to know a thing before you can assess if the output is any good or not. So I think that for me is, that's sort of a bottom line in so many things, right? The second thing, and Sam mentioned this towards the end of his presentation, is about learning those skills, right? I'm sure many of you like to stay fit, right? People in this room like to stay fit, right? Well, if you look at that person right next to you, right, and you say, how about you go to the gym for me today? Right? That's as ridiculous as saying, I used to say to my mom, Mom, can you go pee for me? Right? It's just ridiculous, right? So it's the same kind of logic. If you want those skills, if you want those pack abs, and if you want to be able to sleep without going to the loo, right, you need to do it yourselves. Right? You need to acquire that knowledge yourself. So that is the sort of the philosophy, the foundation of all the classes I teach. And my students use AI, but we try to use it in ways that are benefiting their learning rather than doing the learning or doing the work for them.
One of the things that was very powerful coming out of that survey of experts that I referred to speaks directly to this issue, which is that we've got a new smart sidekick or a new potentially helpful sidekick, maybe drunk uncle, maybe a really good intern, maybe an assistant of one kind or another. But the big challenge heading into the future now is going to be figuring out what you can rely on the AI to help you with and what you need to do for yourself. And as I say, the boundary is going to keep shifting. And what these experts worry about is that as AI looks like it is more persuasive or looks like it is giving credible answers, any number of people are going to default to it and miss out on the process of figuring things out for themselves, which is its own adventure. It's a muddy, messy, complicated, trial and error world. And the people who feel best about things, usually when they figured something out, is when they've gone through the work and the messiness and maybe even some of the struggles of that. And so these experts worry about outsourcing too much to AI that looks good enough and missing out on the sort of complicated, but in the end, sort of glorious parts of being human, which is working stuff out at your own level, for your own good, and for your own purposes.
I would, can I add quickly that we use these metaphors. These metaphors are really useful to the extent that they can point to a real issue. We ought to be careful that in literature, in critical theory, they always say, don't confuse the metaphor's vehicle with the tenor. The vehicle is the drunk uncle. The tenor is what we're trying to say when we use the metaphor, which is unreliable, right? But there is a level of reliability in AI that varies. And therefore that may not be, you may need to stop calling it a drunk uncle because it has become reliable. But then another metaphor is like, okay, it's not a drunk uncle, there's the research assistant. But be careful, to the extent that the metaphor is useful. If you're asked, if an undergraduate student using AI as a research assistant, then they are the research professor. Be careful what you just said, right? So if you're pretending to be the role-playing to be a 7th grader, you can't use a research assistant that is PhD level. You need to have the PhD yourself first. So again, the idea is the human responsibility, human agency, human capacity, human skill, human awareness, right? And it is only by elevating these that you're able to work with it. If we let the AI go so far high up there, it is not like AI is a calculator. When you hit 323 into 427, you can rely on the result. AI is not a calculator. See how we need negative metaphors also? So that you really need to know that it is not straightforward. It is shifting, it is complex. And this is why we need very adaptable metaphors. We need very dynamic skill sets. We need evolving rubrics. What I say around this time next year will be different because the thing is evolving rapidly. But it doesn't mean that we fall behind and let this thing run ahead of us within our domain. Within the domain of learning, we need to take responsibility. No matter how advanced the technology is, I don't care whether uncle is drunk or not. I will not ask any uncle go to the gym for me. That I can tell in 10 years from now as well. If learning is my objective, is going to the gym is my objective, I would still like to figure out to go to the gym with the non-drunk uncle and learn how to do it even better, rather than asking non-drunk uncle to go to the gym. So it is not enough to say AI is reliable. No, I don't care if uncle is completely sober. I want to do the thing that I want to do. That is a question of agency that is more foundational. And if agency itself is threatened, undermined, and 50% of our agency is taken over by AI, then let's have that conversation. But if we don't just give up in black and white manner, it is a complex, multidimensional chess.
Beneficial. We learn, like, we do more development. Even if we are learning, whenever we do go to AI, we're going to the gym less. Opposed to just always less to gym.
Isaiah, could you maybe stand up and so we can better hear you?
You didn't hear nothing I just said?
Yeah, well,
Wait, can you tell me back what you heard? 'Cause I don't know.
yeah, do you want me to say what I heard?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, your name again? Isaiah. So what was Isaiah was asking, if I got correctly, is, okay, if we understood AI as kind of going to the gym for us, doesn't that mean that as we use AI more and more, we're going to be going to the gym less and less? And that there are going to be some side effects to that. Is that about what you were saying?
Then I was also saying that if we learn all the time, then we would never have to use AI. Because either way, if we do use AI, we benefit.
Okay.
So I'm asking him, is AI beneficial at all? Based on what he's saying.
Did you hear that?
Did you both hear that?
Is AI beneficial
it-
at all?
Yeah, so if I may, yeah, Isaiah, is raising the question, if using AI is basically the equivalent of kind of like disabling ourselves because we're not going to the gym, we're not getting to the training, is the implication then that AI is actually not useful at all? And, you know, how would we understand it being useful if we're disempowering ourselves? Is that about right?
Yes. If you don't go to the gym at all, that's a problem, right? But if you go to, even within the limitation of the metaphor, remember, the metaphor is not always useful. Even within the limitation of that metaphor, sending an uncle to the gym is different from going to the gym with the uncle who is knowledgeable about, gym techniques. So why not go to the gym with the uncle, you could say. Or you could say, you are going to not use AI in some context because that's similar to sending your uncle, but you're going to use it in other contexts because AI use is not always describable with that one metaphor. So metaphors only helping us to understand what's happening in particular context, not always. There's no universal metaphor that somebody would be lying if they said that, right? Because the difference between the vehicle and the tenor in a metaphor should always be remembered, right? Like you cannot say, because you compare X with Y, X and Y are the same. Nope, X and Y only overlap a little bit. It is within that overlap we're trying to understand, in such and such context, it is like sending my uncle to the gym. I should not do it. In other contexts, it's like going to the gym with uncle. In other contexts, not sending it, right? It's not gym at all. It is something else.
Isaiah would like to ask another question.
Right, would be like stronger if we just always went to the gym alone.
Quick repeat, please.
Did you hear that?
Maybe Lee has an answer, or Freddie.
Wouldn't it be best
Or
if
David.
you just went to the gym always on your own rather than rely on a drunk or even sober uncle? I can see Lee who might want to respond to that, because actually Isaiah came in after Lee's presentation, and Lee actually presented on how AI can be negative in some people think. It can be very negative in some cases or positive. What do you think, Lee? Do you want to just speak to that survey of yours?
It's actually to the multiple surveys I was referring to. So when we were surveying college presidents and provosts, we asked them about their own use of AI, and a bunch of them said not much. And I'm not real fond of it. And the drunk uncle metaphor really stood out. It feels like a crutch rather than an enhancement. But a number of them talked about a variety of ways that also sort of average citizens talked about. And they fall into a couple of different buckets. The first is just sort of getting your juices flowing. You know, posting a query into AI about anything that, you know, is on your mind is not a bad way to think of it as a sort of a smart friend who says, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Did you know that this was possible? Have you considered these options and things like that? So just the ideation part of any kind of exercise, it might be useful. And high-ranking higher education officials and faculty members and lots of students are say that, you know, that's a useful way to be thinking about using AI in furtherance of learning, and also just furtherance of sort of helping you get through life or helping you make decisions or things like that. There are ways in which AI can bring different perspectives. I mean, all of us have, you know, specific life experiences and specific social networks and specific identities. And there are ways in which AI can really open our eyes to other perspectives and other cultural realities and, you know, scholars who have addressed subjects and things like that. So at the creative level, when people were telling us that it again sort of helps them spark creativity, they're thinking about, I just want to get a broader sense of the lay of the land than I know I have in my own head or in the resources that are immediately available to me. AI can also sort of bring attention to historic relevance of particular things. Again, sort of the social science deans who were responding to us we're talking about multidisciplinary insights that had been sparked by sort of trying to combine fields and ideas that came from multiple different perspectives and things like that. And finally, AI isn't a bad sort of initial critic of a piece of work. If you've written something or if you said you've learned something, AI can maybe spot holes in it, or maybe spot weaknesses in your argument, or maybe tell you that you haven't particularly well addressed a particular thought. You can take it or leave it. I think that's one of the main messages we're trying to convey here. You don't rely on it. You don't default to it. But there are ways in which AI systems are now one other thing that are helping people, but another thing that you really hear from AI creators themselves is that there are some parts of life that just are no fun. That they're drudge work, that they are potentially sometimes unsafe, that they're sometimes potentially, you know, no fun to go through, that you know, there's no big grand purpose in life that's being served by, you know, writing out the citation notes for the academic paper you've just written. AI, it can take a lot of that drudge work off the table and free up people. I mean, a lot of people talked about freeing up people from sort of drudgery and non-productive kinds of activities to give them more time to do things that have meaning to them. Of course, you can waste that time. You can just, you know, sit back and be satisfied with what you've got. But for the people who are thinking that AI can be helpful, it gives them more increments of high quality time rather than time that they feel like isn't productive and doesn't really help them that much, but it just has to be done.
I would add bring back what Freddie said a moment ago, that Lee's idea of decide what is drudge work, decide what is not worth your time, decide what is not part of your objective, decide what is not harming anybody. Those are things that you're going to determine. And for that, you need knowledge and skills and ethical boundaries, right? But the real, the paradox here is that how do you decide what is drudge work? Did you decide it is drudge work because you're busy today, or did you decide it's drudge work based on the learning objectives set out in the course syllabus? Did you decide it's drudge work, or would the professor also agree it is drudge work? Okay, in the context of the context of the field, in the soccer field, it's not only just the player who might decide what's a goal, what's a rule, what's what's enough play. There's also the coach and the referee. And therefore, I think really asking these questions, what is responsible and irresponsible? What do I know and what not? Am I skilled enough or am I not? Did I decide it's drudge work because I'm scared of the deadline or a bad grade? Did I decide it was okay because it is actually okay? Or did I decide it because I'm cutting corners, right? It is for these reasons that we should not ask single or simple questions about AI. This is why when Lee and I are talking, I'm like, these folks are all over the place. They're not being clear. There is a good reason why, which is I can't say, okay, if AI is helping, use it. I'm like, what does helping mean? What is the context? What is the purpose? What is the variable? What is the ethics, right? And that is why you need to have 3 or 4 or 6 pillars. This is why you need to have 1 or 2, 3 or 4 or 5 questions. This is why you need to be responsible towards you and another person that you are dealing with while using AI, and even the environment. This is why it's all a complex tangle where you will decide, I cannot deal with everything right now, but at least I'm not going to hurt my learning, okay? And my honesty and my ability to articulate my own position. So I think if you can do that, then if you can go back to, do I know enough to be able to say this is correct or reliable? Do I have the skill enough to be able to say I'm using it well, rather than hurting my thinking, right? I'm enhancing do you know enough? Are you skilled enough? Are you responsible enough? At least ask 3 questions: knowledge, skills, and honesty. If you can answer those 3 questions, I think you can operate in safer space most of the times.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, so
please.
I'd like to address the question from sort of my personal background. I'm also a musician. I've put out a lot of albums over the years. It's self-produced, and I think either the drunk uncle or the helping uncle, it actually brings up some important things. One, what does it mean to be a musician? Do you have to sing? Do you have to play an instrument? If you do, then you need to practice that yourself, right? Are you more like a composer? Now, if you're a composer, you know you're going to have other people play your music, okay? What if you're more like a DJ, where you're doing mix? I mean, if you're bringing a mix of samples together, are you still a musician? Or is that a musician in a different way? And in particular, the role of sampling. So when I was way back when, sampling was in its infancy. Now it's everything. And we've had to go through a lot of legal processes to understand what is the relationship between the creator of the sample, the user of the sample, who gets some kind of compensation. And I think the essence of AI is that it's in some ways very similar to that question of sampling, right? Yes, Isaiah. Oh, well.
Sorry, I'm taking the mic.
Are you trying to say that it's like taking parts of the process, feels like taking like doing it accountability.
Yep.
Like first one, what's the AI? Come up with the all
It's the idea that in terms of like the large language model, and I think there are some very deep issues here that are not just about ethics, but it's also about economics, which is AI is accessing this, huge database of what is out there. And if we were to understand it as, well, these are samples in the same way that as musical samples or image samples. And what it's doing is it's pulling together all these samples, as if it's a DJ, and it's, moving it around until it comes up with, the music or an image that's like, okay, this looks pretty good, right? The question is, if you're using AI, to what extent is it the same thing as you're using samples from not just a handful of people, but millions of people, right? Yeah.
Like some of the things that they were saying, I feel like we were losing individuality. Because you're like, they're pulling from a little too much. I feel like personal creativity, like you pull like a certain amount from each part.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable question. At what point is it other people's stuff, and at what point is it yours?
We've got another question or point over here.
So somebody that like, as a musician or somebody that's interested in the creative arts myself, like this is a big issue right now, obviously, it's a big discussion. And I think, I thought it was fascinating that people think they're more creative with AI. I think that's a very interesting thing, right? That was kind of the big takeaway, if I understood it correctly. And I wonder, how these two ideas interact, that having to be knowledgeable about something, but also feeling more creative about it. Because I think as a musician, that AI is not creative and the tools that we've seen are not creative. And I think that it shows maybe a lack of understanding on what creativity is or what it means to make art. And I'm just curious what the panel, what you guys have been researching about, in talking with people who necessarily wouldn't ascribe themselves as creatives or people in the arts, how they see this affecting the art industry, the art world. I think musicians and creatives are very sensitive to this kind of technology for good reason. Napster blew up the whole industry way back when, and I think I think a lot of them are worried about the same thing happening again, right? But I'm curious how, and I think that, again, we were talking about permissibility or ethical concerns, or like what people think is ethical, and I think that was also part of the problem, back when with Napster, was that people thought it was ethical to take that music, right? Like they didn't understand what that meant to the industry and to the group musicians that they were doing that to, right? And so I wonder if it's the same kind of thing. How people think about it now. So I'm just curious to hear some thoughts on that.
Well, let me say, in the context of our general population survey, so we're just asking everyday citizens, a representative sample of them, about dimensions of their use of AI, especially language models. I think, and it's a guess, but it's an educated guess, that when we mentioned creativity, we asked them whether it helped them be creative, they were not thinking about the commercial aspects of it or I'm adding something brand spanking new to the world. I think as they told us, they're using these tools kind of for fun, for interacting with new ideas or new information, or just having questions answered or things like that. So in a sense, I think they were saying to us, when it helps me be creative, it just is an easy way for me to get a relatively quick but not bad answer on something that's on my mind, or something that's puzzling me, or something that I just want to dive down a rabbit hole. in many cases, they do dive down the rabbit hole and they start getting more sophisticated in their prompts and they ask for citations and they research the links that they've been given and stuff like that. But they're not making, I think, the same connection that you're really smartly making about, well, what happens to whole creative industries when this becomes a way in which people show their stuff. And I think there's stupendous concern about that, as you noted. And I was researching the internet in the early days of Napster, and this is the exact same flavor of that. And what you got out of that, of course, eventually was brand new business models, which didn't necessarily help, artists too terribly much. But what did happen in the culture was that many more people thought of themselves as artists, even if they were doing a garage band or a bar band, or they were dabbling in art in one way, shape, or form. There were a lot more people who were doing creative things, in part because they learned on the internet or because they took a little quickie lesson on things. And so there was a way in which the culture itself became more creative, even as the business of being creative got a lot more difficult.
Exactly. The same thing might happen with education, writing. So we cannot set these elitist standards of you need to have a PhD in order to do this, right? It may actually diffuse. The PhD may diffuse in a way that you do not expect. And after 10, 20 years, you may accept it, right? At the same time, I think it needs to happen with a little knowledge, a little, I don't know, the internet is a good analogy, because at least there, people were not, well, it actually went down south very quickly, but we may want to look at the metaphor someone used earlier with the hot frog in a pond situation, right? Maybe it did democratize music, it did democratize writing, it did democratize knowledge and information, but maybe it did it at a cost that are not so salubrious, right? It may be that information landscape becomes so polluted that we have suffered the consequences of it. And there's nothing wrong about saying, look, information became democratized, but we also became victims of this massive landscape that is upside down, right? In our civic life, in our daily life, in our community life. Look at social media. There's no need to say, oh, just because social media became normalized, we have to accept that as the norm. Maybe part of our job as educators and educated people like students is to say, no, I don't accept that norm that social media like Facebook created. My dad is on his Facebook all day, and my mom doesn't talk to her, family. So there are, again, two dimensions there, right? One is, yes, the positive democratization and the diffusion, but at the same time, the concerns that may need to be still addressed and discussed. And I don't think we should be afraid to tell the truth and say, okay, it made a lot of more people creative and writers and knowledgeable, but at the same time, there are issues that we have suffered and we need to really, moving forward, learn the lessons. This is why the Center for Humane Technology is saying we need to learn the lesson from the social media fiasco and really apply some of the wisdom to the new regime of AI, because if we don't do that, it is going to get not only to the stem of our brains to engage us in the doom scrolling culture, but it's also going to into the stem of our trust as social structure. It could actually fall apart if we allow everything to become normalized and then accept norm as culture. There are good cultures, there are bad cultures. There are cultures we would get behind, there are cultures we push back against, right? And sometimes at the cost of becoming unpopular. And I'm one, in the landscape of writing, I'm one who would be able to say, yes, great, wonderful, but did you pay attention to X? And I'll make people uncomfortable doing that.
Sam, I'm gonna butt in now, because to speak to your question, I am a theater person and a dramaturg. And I worry about this a lot, and I worry about it in my teaching. But actually, I'm also positive. And I think that as an artist, people are so moved by the liveness of performance, right? And this is found a way in all of my teaching. So for instance, the first year writers at Bloomfield College will present their research in person. Every single one of them. The students in my art of drama class and my Gothic literature class last semester, those Gothic lit students they created artistic installations, right, out of their reading about literature, and they presented, right, their findings through artistic means, right, through hands-on installations. And in my art of drama class, they're going to be presenting, right, their work in front of a live audience. So I realized that, you know, my discipline lends itself to live, but this is, of course, you know, your question as an artist. I also think, to be, again, very positive, in times like this is when the artists start to really respond, right? So if you are an artist who is worried about the proliferation of AI-generated content, lean into liveness, because that's one thing that AI can't do.
If I may also to address this, there's a little aphorism I like to communicate about creativity, and that is, you pay to create, you get paid to produce. And that's not just about money, it's about the energy. And I think one of the elements about the creative experience is not just, you know, what are you doing externally? It's that feeling like there's something from inside of yourself that's being expressed. And that maybe, you know, the way to relate to AI, whether you identify as a creative or not, is it helping you to express yourself into the world? Then that's a useful tool. If it's helping you to produce something so you can make a living, that's a useful tool. But if you're getting addicted to it and you're using it to say, okay, well, what do I feel? Then that's probably where it's gone too far, right? You know, it's like you don't want to be in a habit of asking AI, how do I feel today?
So thank you. Just take the mic over.
I think that AI is a good and a bad thing. I feel like AI is a good and bad thing. I really think that it depends on how you use it and what you're using it for, especially for what you just mentioned. I feel like it can make people sometimes more creative. They just need a place to start, because sometimes people don't know where to start. That's like, hey, I need an outline for this. Like, I know what I'm doing, but I don't know how to organize this. Majority of people do use it for that. Sometimes that's how I need help to start my work in order to dive a little more into myself and my thoughts. This is kind of like revealing things that I probably would have noticed on my own that AI would have revealed to me, and it would be harder processes, much easier for me to deal with, especially for entrepreneurs. If they already have the knowledge for something, let's say accounting, they already went to school for it, but sometimes when they, you know, they grow their own company, they don't know where to start, and they want to attract more clients, kind of gives you tips and tricks on how to do that and how to make your work easier in a short amount of time, especially when you're on your own and your clientele has grown so much, because my mom uses AI for the same things as well, and definitely cut her time in half, and she's able to help her clients much quicker.
Could you hear that, Lee? I think, unfortunately,
By the way, I have a class which is about 7-8 minutes at least away, so I got to run to class. I'd like to let the conversation continue, and just wanted to say thank you very much for today. I will be listening, but I won't be able to turn on my video. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
So, Lee, I'm going to throw that to you, and to Freddie as well. I don't know whether you could hear what the student said.
I hope I heard enough to be useful. I think that beautifully articulated the paradox that comes out of a lot of our research. You know, there are just ways that people can well articulate how it works for them. And the same people can articulate how they might turn to, or it might overtake them, or it might become a crutch or a dependence of theirs. And so I think, again, sort of everybody's going to sort of sort this out on a pretty regular basis. And it's going to be sorted out at the level of learning. You're going to have to talk to the people you're learning with, particularly your teachers. Can I use it or can't I? Is it okay in this instance, but not okay in this instance? And the bargaining over that is going to be now part of the learning process. I think that the peer review in public, in person, is a gorgeous example of how learning, in many cases, when these academic leaders were talking about change classroom models, they're talking about lots of classrooms now where maybe a lot of the work learning might take place in the context of AI. But at the end of the day, when mastery is measured and when whether students have particularly come through a subject or not, or produced work that's worthy or not, doing it in public and certainly in front of a teacher, if not in front of peers, is going to be a really common way for those kind of tests of mastery to take place. The one other thing I would just add to the conversation, which it takes this to a sort of global conceptual stage, is that interesting references to social media. At the dawn of social media, when we were studying it in 2008, 2009, when Facebook and Twitter were really taking off, even though there had been predecessors to them, there was a lot of hope and very little fear about what social media would do to the culture. It was going to democratize information. It was going to allow a lot more people to tell their stories and bring their perspectives especially to democratic life. It was going to allow a lot more people to be creative without gatekeepers standing in the way of deciding whether they were going to get a license or an art show or to have their book published or something like that. So a lot of hope, and soon enough, it's sort of by the mid-teens, Techflash had started. So what we learned was incentives matter. And social media was incentivized for attention. And when you maximize how to get people's attention, it turns out that you irritate them, or you anger them, or you encourage them to be their worst selves. And that's what gets more attention, more clicks, more comments, more likes, and things like that. Artificial intelligence by the businesses that are building it now is going to be optimized for intimacy, which is even sort of more personal and precious than attention itself. It's going to be, as you think about the agents that are being rolled out into the world, they're only going to work for you if you trust them. And so these companies are building, incredibly better and better models that are aiming at convincing you that you can rely on them, that you can entrust your tastes to them. You can entrust maybe some of your banking information to them. You can entrust some of your social realities to them and have them go out and negotiate on your behalf, or complete transactions on your behalf, or interact with people on your behalf. And so I think the call to everybody in this room, particularly the scholars in the room, is let's figure out what optimizing for intimacy for money turns us into and does to our culture.
So in your slide, we were talking about surveys and students asking about how often you think AI will be used in their classrooms in the future, and a large portion said significantly. So
A little louder, sorry, a little louder.
So if we can expect more AI in our classrooms in the future, do you think that the overuse and dependency of AI can be damaging to building personal connection with teachers and damaging face-to-face communication and building social skills overall? Because even though AI may not be hurting our learning or knowledge, it may be hurting the social skills and networking in general, because we feel more comfortable asking AI than having face-to-face communication, and that could be sort of a dull classroom setting.
Oh gosh, what a gorgeous question. So there are ways in which it can work out better. As I say, negotiating with your professors and your peers about what's good to do and what's bad to do is just going to be a requirement now of being a learner in the modern age. But the thing that you're worried about takes place at two levels. One is what we've been talking about a whole bunch, which is deferring to AI and letting it make decisions for you, or letting it substitute and be your voice in the world, or your effort in the world, rather than it being really your effort. But the other dimension of this is a sense that people might be become demoralized basically in a world where AI is too much. That they might not think that they have much to contribute. They might not think that they are smart enough to make a decision or a contact. And the AIs themselves are going to get so much better. When you type in your prompts to them and when you maybe give it some biographical information or stuff, it's learning about you. And they're going to get better at figuring out who you are and what works for you. And it might be helpful to have an AI know that you're really a pictorial learner. You don't learn so much when you're in an oral situation. You love seeing pictures. You love having visual displays of information. Well, that could probably be a good thing. But if your AI becomes too good at being your best buddy, then you might substitute your relationship, please with quotes around it, with an AI bot for a real relationship with a flesh and blood human being. And that's a big concern that people have. And I think it's one of the things you're implying in your question.
So, Lee, thank you for that. Thank you all the students for all their excellent questions. Ready?
Thank you so much.
Sam is no longer available. Ethne. It is now 3:30, so I think we're gonna call it for now. And that doesn't mean the conversation can still continue, but we're gonna call it for today.
And the students need to stay.
And students, you need to stay.
I have to go.
Yes,
Thank you very much, Lee.
Lee, thank you so much. And
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Okay.
Lee. Thanks, Sam.
okay. Freddie, thank you so much. Yeah, and incidentally, Professor Harris Ramsey, I was